Welcome back to Unseen Rite, where the shadows whisper secrets that should have stayed buried. Tonight, we step into a legacy of pure, engineered evil. 8 generations of the Ashford family who turned systematic destruction into an art form. They didn't just kill, they designed frameworks to dismantle entire societies from within, leaving no trace but obedient silence. Imagine a family whose influence has infected your history books, your laws, your daily life. In the late 17th century, Jeremiah Ashford orchestrated the Salem witch trials, not for God, not for justice, but to seize land, crush rivals, and blackmail officials into serving his growing extortion ring. His journals, hidden behind false church ledgers, speak of the cultivation method, destroying targeted families through accusations, executions, and psychological terror to harvest their resources. This was the birth of what they called the family business. By the time Ezekiel Ashford took the reins in the early 1700s, the Ashfords had perfected the art of making people disappear. Fishing boats lost at sea, lumber mills burned overnight, textile owners found drowned in shallow rivers. Industries collapsed under a terror only whispered about in taverns. Ezekiel didn't just break men, he documented their erasure, rewriting town ledgers, forging deeds, creating fake graves, and planting corrupted clergy to sanctify their crimes under God's name. This was the documentation project. The Ashfords understood that whoever controlled memory controlled power. But it wasn't enough to destroy businesses. Ezekiel wanted bloodlines engineered to obey. He initiated the breeding program, arranged marriages, kidnappings, and reconditioning stolen children to create loyal human resources. Imagine a child taken at 5, taught that pain is purpose, and released at 20 as an obedient merchant, clergyman, or wife, never knowing their true bloodline or fate. This was the darkness your schools never taught. Hidden under the Ashford name, masked as noble philanthropists, funding chapels and charities. Tonight, I am your mentor, dragging you into the abyss of engineered corruption, where each generation refined these horrors into systematic psychological control until entire regions bent under their shadow. This is not just a history lesson. This is a map of how darkness designs the world you trust. Under Ezekiel's iron reign, the Ashford family evolved from local tyrants into architects of societal terror. By the mid-18th century, Matthias Ashford expanded their dominion into the mid-Atlantic states, weaving a web of influence that snared merchants, clergy, judges, and militia alike. He wasn't satisfied with land or trade. He wanted minds. Matthias pioneered what he called behavioral research, kidnapping the vulnerable to experiment on human psychology. Victims were dissected without knives, broken piece by piece through isolation, starvation, forced loyalty rituals, and torture disguised as spiritual correction. Their cries echoed through hidden chambers beneath orphanages as Matthias built the farm system, facilities posing as charitable refugees designed to condition children into servants, informants, and silent enforcers. Imagine children learning to recite scripture while chained in dark rooms, rewarded with food only when they memorized commands that erased their identities. This was institutional manipulation perfected, breaking the human spirit and remaking it in the Ashford image. These conditioned children would later infiltrate merchant guilds, local governments, and even families marked for targeted destruction, gathering intelligence and enforcing Ashford will. But Matthias's darkness didn't end with covert conditioning. He orchestrated massacres in settlements that refused Ashford demands, burning villages to ashes, then funding their reconstruction under his name. Survivors became permanent debt slaves, psychologically broken and stripped of identity. He documented everything: experiments, massacre strategies, debt systems, in coded tomes, locked in iron vaults beneath Ashford estates. Each page is a blueprint of systematic evil. Matthias understood a truth the powerful keep hidden. When terror becomes institutional, resistance becomes myth. And so he infiltrated banks, courts, and local councils, rerouting funds, forging land deeds, and blackmailing officials with manufactured evidence of treason or moral deviance. Every family he broke, every orphan he stole, every settlement he razed became another stone in the Ashford Foundation, a foundation built on human ruin. I am your mentor, dragging you deeper into their labyrinth of engineered horror. The Ashfords were not monsters in shadows, they were lords in daylight, masked by scripture and civility. They taught the world that power is not taken, it is harvested from broken souls, planted in blood-soaked soil, and reaped in silence. And we are only beginning to uncover the scope of their dominion. As the 18th century waned and the revolution raged, Cornelius Ashford emerged, a master manipulator who thrived on chaos. While patriots and loyalists bled for freedom or crown, Cornelius expanded the Ashford Empire in silence, embedding its black veins deep into the heart of a fledgling nation. He developed what he called the federal strategy. While others fought over flags, he bought politicians, funded militias on both sides, and blackmailed officers with orchestrated scandals and forged correspondence. He understood that revolution is a theater. Power lies not in the actors, but in those who write the script and own the stage. Cornelius used the war's chaos to seize vast tracts of land, particularly indigenous territories. He orchestrated bribery chains to manipulate treaties, then unleashed militia raids to force surrenders. When resistance rose, he funded civilian militias to massacre entire communities, recording the atrocities as savage reprisals to justify further seizure. The dead were never mourned. They were catalogued in his documentation imperative, a series of falsified histories funded by Ashford Gold to sanctify genocide as progress. But land was only the beginning. Cornelius embedded Ashford loyalists into the emerging government, judges, treasury officials, trade regulators. He understood that controlling land created wealth, but controlling laws created eternity. Every signature in those founding days, every document that shaped a nation's laws, was scrutinized by Ashford agents for opportunity. Meanwhile, their breeding program continued, now targeting indigenous children stolen during raids. They were reconditioned into servants and field managers, stripped of language, memory, and name. Ashford estates grew prosperous on their backs, while official records labeled them as indentured apprentices or Christian converts, erasing all traces of their true identity and family. Imagine the horror of a child who remembers their village only in dreams, trained to obey the very family who orchestrated their people's slaughter. This was not chaos. This was design, ancient corruption hidden beneath the respectable marble pillars of early American society. I'm your mentor, dragging you further into the abyss, where the Ashfords learned the ultimate lesson of power. If you write the laws, record the history, and shape the minds, your crimes become civilization itself. And this was only the foundation. The next generation would perfect their darkness into a machinery of human exploitation the world still fails to see. Cornelius Ashford Jr. inherited an empire built on corpses and silence, and during the Civil War, he forged it into a machine that devoured lives with industrial precision. While generals plotted battlefields and politicians debated emancipation, Cornelius Jr. saw opportunity in human suffering. He supplied weapons to both Union and Confederate forces, funding intelligence networks that traded secrets for gold and influence. But his true darkness emerged in what he called the charitable initiative. Under the guise of refugee relief, Ashford agents established camps along war-torn routes, offering food and shelter to the desperate. But those camps were fronts for trafficking networks. Children, women, and men funneled into forced labor, prostitution, and experimental research facilities hidden behind orphanage walls. This was the identity replacement program. Families were separated, Children were renamed and conditioned, trained to forget their origins. Women were sold to plantation owners and factory magnates, with Ashford notaries forging documents to legitimize each transaction. Disabled or broken captives were transferred to research facilities for medical and psychological experimentation, testing thresholds of pain, obedience, and neurological control. These were no crude tortures. Cornelius Jr. employed physicians and theologians to codify their findings into manuals for obedient workforce development. They pioneered chemical sedation techniques, environmental control systems, and behavioral reprogramming that formed the silent roots of later institutional control models across the industrialized world. And when their experiments were complete, contaminated water supplies ensured outbreaks wiped the evidence, while Ashford-funded historians rewrote death records as cholera or dysentery. The dead were buried in mass graves under Ashford farms, fertilizing fields that grew wheat for soldiers and politicians who unknowingly feasted on the fruits of horror. I'm your mentor, dragging you into this abyss where the Ashfords revealed the greatest truth of engineered evil: that systematic exploitation is most effective when masked as charity, and control most unbreakable when it erases memory itself. Comment engineered shadows below. Say it twice to lock in your transformation and prove you walk these forbidden halls with us. Because what I reveal next will shred the last illusions you have about freedom, mercy, and civilization itself. The Ashfords did not die out. Their legacy thrives in places you will never suspect. As the 19th century gave way to a modernizing world, the Ashfords adapted like shadows shifting with the light. While the public embraced progress and technology, the Ashfords refined their dominion into near-invisible systems of control. They no longer needed swords or militias. Their weapons became banks, corporations, and laws. By the early 20th century, family branches infiltrated industrial conglomerates, creating multinational networks that controlled railroads, coal, and steel. They pioneered lobbying as a weapon, bribing and blackmailing legislators to bend policies in their favor. Their federal strategy evolved into a doctrine: legitimacy is the fortress no rebellion can breach. But their true innovation was psychological. They funded social research institutes disguised as philanthropic foundations, recruiting academics to study human behavior, motivation, and fear. Their experiments moved beyond orphanages into universities, prisons, and hospitals. Sleep deprivation studies, induced schizophrenia, electroshock conditioning, all funded by Ashford trusts under noble banners like public mental health advancement. Imagine a young man sent for alcoholism treatment, finding himself strapped to a bed while his mind is torn apart in the name of research. Or a female patient admitted for hysteria, only to be chemically lobotomized to test docility thresholds. Their results shaped training manuals for government agencies and corporations worldwide. They didn't just want money or power. They wanted to engineer a civilization of obedient, docile populations blind to their own shackles. Meanwhile, their documentation imperative expanded into media. The Ashfords acquired publishing houses, newspapers, and later broadcasting companies. They understood, whoever controls the narrative controls perception. Every story, every televised speech, every school textbook was reviewed by their silent agents for ideological alignment. Whistleblowers were erased through manufactured scandals, psychiatric commitments, or silent disappearances. And in their private archives lay grim trophies, leather-bound volumes of human experimentation records, keys to underground vaults storing the bodies that built their empire, and codices detailing psychological control systems still embedded in corporate training, military indoctrination, and mass media persuasion today. I am your mentor, dragging you deeper into the abyss where the Ashford family's darkness became the bloodstream of modern civilization. You will soon realize The systems you trust to protect you were built upon the bones of engineered horror, designed by those who mastered humanity's weaknesses into an unbreakable chain. By the dawn of the 21st century, the Ashford family no longer needed to hide in candlelit parlors or shadowed estates. Their descendants walked among presidents, prime ministers, CEOs, and bishops, their bloodlines woven into every pillar of global power. But their doctrine never changed: control the mind, harvest the soul, erase the crime. Under gleaming skyscrapers and philanthropic initiatives, they perfected human management into a science. Their foundations funded global public health initiatives while secretly patenting pharmaceuticals that created dependence rather than cure. Their media conglomerates championed mental health awareness while promoting imagery and ideologies designed to fracture collective self-esteem, ensuring a compliant, anxious populace seeking salvation from their own tormentors. The farm system evolved into private orphanage networks disguised as international adoption charities. Children vanished into these labyrinths, their identities erased with forged birth certificates, reconditioned into loyalty through psychological fracturing, trauma bonding, and Stockholm programming. Many emerged as silent executives, think tank advisors, or covert operatives, unaware their paths had been engineered since infancy. Meanwhile, their documentation imperative adapted to the digital age. Entire departments exist to edit historical archives, digital libraries, and media databases to erase whistleblower traces and sanitize past atrocities. With AI-driven surveillance, they no longer fear exposure. They control not only what is seen, but what is remembered, and even what is imagined. But the darkest truth is hidden in their modern research vaults: biotechnological experimentation. Gene manipulation projects carried out under shell companies aim to design compliant workforces with suppressed aggression and heightened obedience. Patents for neural interface devices promise medical miracles but hide subdermal behavioral override capabilities, giving corporations the keys to human autonomy itself. I'm your mentor, dragging you into the final chamber of this abyss, where the Ashford legacy is no longer a hidden evil, but the silent architecture of civilization. Their doctrine lives in your social contracts, your belief in institutional benevolence, your programmed fear of rebellion. They have perfected psychological control systems so subtle that even those who see them remain enslaved by them. In the final section, I will reveal the truth that will forever sever the illusions you hold about your world. Brace yourself, for once seen, it can never be unseen. Welcome to the final chamber of truth. The Ashford family's story is not a relic of forgotten centuries. It is the blueprint upon which modern civilization was built. Their descendants sit on corporate boards that dictate global food supplies, control pharmaceuticals that numb entire populations, and steer digital platforms that engineer the collective mind. Their foundation, born in the 17th century as a manual for blackmail and psychological destruction, is now encoded in artificial intelligence systems that monitor and model human behavior. Every search query, every purchase, every flicker of micro-expression on your face is data-fed into models refined by centuries of Ashford methodology. Models that predict, manipulate, and modify you without your awareness. Imagine Cornelius Jr. dissecting refugees in hidden chambers, then realize his doctrine lives in today's refugee processing centers, where biometric scans and psychological profiling determine who will be integrated, who will be exploited, and who will simply vanish. Imagine Matthias's orphanage laboratories, then look into modern behavioral research institutes still using trauma exposure under the name of resilience training. Their documentation imperative is now a global data purge system. Leaked scandals vanish from search results, critical whistleblowers find their reputations digitally assassinated, and history itself is rewritten line by line, timestamp by timestamp. Their doctrine of engineered amnesia has achieved perfection. But here is the final horror. Their goal was never mere wealth or domination. It was the permanent subjugation of the human soul. For them, the greatest victory is a population that loves its enslavement, that kneels willingly before those who devour their lives in silence. And so, as your mentor, I leave you with this question. When every thought you think is shaped by their doctrine, every institution you trust is founded upon their methods, every truth you hold is filtered through their illusions. Who are you really? Welcome back to Unseen Rite. You have walked through forbidden corridors of darkness today. If your eyes are open, comment Ashford Shadows twice below to join the awakened who refuse engineered oblivion. Share this revelation, subscribe, and never forget, the darkest evil is not hidden in shadows. It is embedded in the systems you believe protect you.